Hi, I'm Meshal Malik and you're watching Indus Special. For more than a month now, protests have been ongoing all across India against the Citizenship Amendment Act. At the forefront of these protests are the students, many of who have paid a heavy price for their activism and fight. On today's show, we take a look at the critical role students are playing in India's politics and what they hope to achieve. Joining us for this discussion is Dr. Lubna Sarwath, who's the Telangana State General Secretary of the Socialist Party in India. She joins us from Hyderabad. Also joining us is Ms. Kamla Bhasin, who's an activist, joining us from Dhaka, and Ms. Jyotsna Siddharth, who's an activist and writer, joining us from Delhi. Thank you all for joining us and welcome to the show. Dr. Sarwath, let me begin with you. Now, we have been seeing a movement, upheaval all across India for more than a month now. Is this a defining moment in India's politics?
Yeah, this is not just in the defining moment for Indian politics, but also for India and for Indian youth especially. So this is the defining moment, not only also in terms of the personality of the section of society that is evolving, but also to take the every opportunity in the cusp of this moment to evolve into an ethical and egalitarian society that will gather with itself all the relevant values that will push up the civilizational standards, the living standards, the human standards, the value thinking standards. These are the standards that we expect to evolve from this inqilab that is happening in India. Apart from the signature of this entire movement, that is the youth and the educated youth and the youth that is brimming with all energy and with all affection necessary in the necessary quantum, the boldness in the necessary quantum, and the concern, humanitarian concern, the constitutional concern, the moral concern in the necessary quantum. You see the non-violent signature of those protests. You see the ikhlas, the sincerity in those protests. You see the type of the secular trend across the spectrum. So these are the type of things that are evolving out of this, and this moment is actually I think is a true independence from all sorts of degenerated thoughts and values. And this is what we are seeing in the country now.
Dr. Sarwath, as mentioned, we're seeing the youth at the forefront of this. Jyotsna, let me ask you this. Why do you think the youth is coming and emerging to be at the front of this movement, at the front of all the protests we're seeing?
I feel like there is impending crisis at the moment where there is very little options or alternatives that we have. And students have been at the forefront of this because it affects them. You know, it's the new generation whose future is at risk. There is a political turmoil. There is clearly a dearth of strong political leadership. And I think students are directly affected by it, you know, the rise of fees in the JNU and, you know, just the curbing of dissent in general. I think it affects students because they're just not able to, I mean, there is a lot of disillusionment, right? Like, it is kind of affecting their future, their academics, their life, the quality of life. And I feel like that is why, and also the Jamia and JNU incidents that happened really shook the morale of students because it was the first time that, you know, not maybe for the first time, but it's like openly police and has entered into the institutions and lashing out violence on students. So I think that sort of crisis is really asking for unity and for solutions from younger people. You know, I think younger people feel that there is no longer like a time where you could just sit and not do anything about it.
Right. Jyotsna, you mentioned here how after JNU, of course, there is this realization protesting, your activism comes at a cost. You might be met with violence as we are seeing across. How did the JNU incident change the mood and momentum of the protests and the movements that were ongoing for quite some time now?
I feel like it started with Jamia, and it was the first time that Jamia is one of the most primary institutions. And it was the first time that we saw that police just entered into the institution and, unexpectedly started lashing tear gas at students. And this was completely unexpected. And when the same thing happened in the JNU, it sort of shook everybody because people felt like this is something that could have never happened, because if you go on any normal day in JNU, you require an ID to enter into the campus, or you need to know someone to enter into the campus. The fact that people just entered into the campus unannounced with iron rods and whatnot, it really shook everybody. The fact that now people in Bollywood also started talking about it, and we know that that is a very rare moment. So it kind of brought, and recently we've seen similar thing happen in Shrishti. So we're seeing that, people are realizing that it's only a matter of time till it comes to them. Earlier, people just thought that, this is something affecting people in remote areas or very aloof from them. But now I think everyone is kind of realizing that it's only a matter of time till they bear the consequences directly.
Right. Ms. Bhasin, let me move now. We're seeing, of course, debate and discourse on all platforms when we talk about the movement within India. And we're seeing many, many students, many activists come on the streets, but at the same time, we're seeing an assault on their freedom. Do you feel like the progressive spaces that existed before in India are shrinking?
I mean, of course, the state everywhere in the world doesn't want to give us the spaces, but I think I'm just so proud of what is happening in India. I mean, instead of shrinking spaces in the last month, I have seen the spaces expanding, and this is what democracy is: resistance, dissent, asking questions, not obeying orders. And I think we are glad we have the Indian Constitution, which says we are a secular country. So we have the right and the responsibility to protect our Constitution. And I'm really proud that in university after university, college after college in India, people have risen, both women and men. And I must add here that it's not just the students. The women of Shaheen Bagh near Jamia Nagar, about 18 nights and days, they are on the road. Women from the ages of 1 year up to 82, 83. And what an amazing show of all religions, all ages. I mean, today I saw Sikh men and women preparing and serving food. 2 days ago, Sikhs were singing Sikh songs, and then there were Hindus who were, with their prayers. So, I mean, total example of what a secular be and we want to be.
Right.
But
Ms.
you
Bhasin,
have asked a question to another. Yeah, sorry.
Ms. Bhasin, here when you're discussing the scene, there is, of course, and Jyotsna also mentioned, there is this sense of urgency to change the path on which India is headed. Do you feel like activism could change that course?
If at all anything can change it, it will be this activism. And in India, we have done it many times before. When Indira Gandhi ji tried her emergency on us, it was the activism, started again by young people, but then it took off. So obviously we are hoping that also political parties, and so many political parties have opposed the new act. They are opposing this in so many Indian states. The state governments have said, we will not implement this act. So obviously we hope that it will gain momentum and we will move towards that. And yeah, that's what it is. And
Right.
we hope it will lead to something.
Right. Dr. Sarwath, is the government also reckoning and realizing what the demands of the people are? Are they trying to find ways to reconcile with this, especially reconcile with the demands of the youth?
Yeah, in matter of fact, if you look at the happenings over the past fortnight here, including the last days of the previous year, they actually backtracked to such an extent that the Prime Minister of India had to tell in his Ram Leela ground speech that since 2014, his government never spoke about the NRC, that's the National Register of Citizens, or the detention centers. So here is a government that has kept this in its manifesto, that had replied right from 2014 to 19 on the floor of the parliament in the Lok Sabha, repeatedly, and answered the starred questions by his ministers. And the Home Minister during the election campaign right from October 2019 has been told this in umpteen times about the chronology of the CAA 2019 being brought in, then the NRC that would be rerun in Assam and across the country. And in spite of telling all this on record in the parliament, the Prime Minister had to resort to this blatant lies and distortions of their own policies, which are even now present on the website. So, what should we take this as? Instead of reaching out to the entire public, telling that, yes, what is it that you want us to change on? It's a democratic government. That's the first step they have to do, that is dialogue. Instead of doing that, they are reiterating again. The Home Minister tells we will not move an inch back, and the Prime Minister tells that we have never spoken about it at all. So these are the highly unreconcilable statements coming out from the helm of the governmental institutions of India. And
Right.
now that being on one side, on the other side, we have the courts that told that the high courts can actually hear to all the pleas against CAA that are across India. That's a great victory for the people of India. And the historic thing that has happened to the CAA 2019 Act is this, that normally we go for the, take the feedback from the public, and then the draft is presented in the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha for acceptance.
Right.
But here it is the other way around. The historic thing that happened is they passed the act, and now the Home Ministry is on the streets distributing the pamphlets to seek support for the CAA 2019.
Right.
So this is how haywire the government is going, and it is bad for the government, but very good for India.
Dr. Sarwath, yes, you're listing out the issues here that the people have with the government. And on that point, I do want to jump to Jyotsna and talk to her about this. Now, what's happening in India is a multi-layered issue. The frustration that we're seeing amongst the youth is, of course, not just because of one factor, several factors. We're also seeing that India is set for its lowest economic growth in the past couple of years. That's what's going to happen. Now, with all of this, what are the demands of the students?
It would be difficult for me to kind of represent the demands of students because I'm not a student, I'm an ally, and I've been closely kind of being involved with what Kamla Bhasin was mentioning about Shaheen Bagh and, other protests that have been ongoing in India right now, especially Delhi. But I think one of the the most important demand that we all have and we're all kind of protesting against is to roll back CAA and NRC and this complete sort of, the building of detention centers, and it has to be scrapped. That is where the first thing starts. And apart from that, there are, of course, other issues. We're seeing, like you mentioned, we're seeing economic growth is completely on downfall. But apart from that, there are lots of social issues that are emerging, the safety and security of women and the growing sexual violence and all sort of violence against minorities and especially the marginalized communities, Dalits, Adivasis, women across all caste, religions.
Right.
There is a serious crisis right now.
Right. Jyotsna, as you're saying here, that women, of course, we're seeing them in large amounts of numbers protesting. We're seeing what's happening in Shaheen Bagh. Now, with all of this, is this unprecedented? Women who are coming at the forefront, playing an important political role at this point in time. Is this unprecedented?
Absolutely. I feel like women have championed, in Shaheen Bagh, it's almost going to be a month. They've been, they have really been at the forefront, sitting in the cold weather, 24/7 with their children. There's a lot of sort of support from men as well. And it's just, we're seeing that there is this whole community that is built around Shaheen Bagh, but also Seelampur, Zakir Nagar, Zafrabad, other parts of Delhi, which needs that support. And there is this growing organizing of women across the city. And I feel that I feel this fight has to be somewhere fought by women and people from marginalized communities, because they are really at the brink of, to be affected by, and everyone else is going to be affected by it. But it really targets the most marginalized sections in the country right now.
Right.
So I definitely do feel that this sort of organizing that's happening in different parts of Delhi by women, and we're also seeing across the country, is really giving us hope. It's giving us inspiration and motivation to keep the fight going.
Right. Ms. Kamla, now the ruling party's actions had emboldened many Hindutva sentiments all across society, but at this point, what is being reiterated again and again is civil society's unity. Is it unified all across the board?
You were asking just now, what are the people demanding? I think I want to emphasize, they are demanding that the constitution be followed by our governments. We are demanding that India, which is the Jamuna Ganga Tehzeeb of India, where Muslims and Hindus and Christians and others have lived together, that you cannot divide us on these lines. We will not accept it. And I do want to wish to mention that the Shaheen Bagh women are breaking all these myths about Muslim women, that they are passive and they can't do this. Look at these brave women. Absolutely amazing, and I salute them, and I salute the entire women's movement which is standing with them and taking this struggle forward. So, that is what is so absolutely amazing and is giving us hope. After many years of a lull, we're suddenly feeling upbeat, we're feeling hopeful, and we are hoping that it will get us somewhere.
Right. And moving towards future speculations, that's all we can do at this point in time. But where do you think things are headed?
The future will really depend on how long we can sustain this. They are perhaps waiting that we'll get tired. And they have all the power, they have all the army, they have all the police. So we will have to see where we go. And we will also see what political actions the political parties take. Elections have to take place. We will see what the people in Delhi decide within a month. So, the future is yet to be. I can't predict it. And obviously, as someone who loves her constitution, who loves her Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb, who was born in, who lives now in India, whose closest friends are women in Hindus, Muslim and others. So, that's what we are standing up for, and we hope the Constitution will win. We hope human rights will win. We hope educational institutions will not be weakened. We hope education will be free or at least not expensive, so that all classes of young men and women go to education, all that.
Right. On that point, thank you so much, Ms. Bhasin, for joining us from Dhaka, Jyotsna, Siddharth for joining us from Delhi, and Dr. Lubna Sarwath for joining us from Hyderabad. We're going to go for a short break. When we return, we take a look at the move by the Israeli prison service that is being seen as an assault by activists who have worked for the protection of child detainees. Stay with us. Welcome back to the show. On Monday, the Israeli Prison Service transferred at least 33 Palestinian child detainees from Offer Prison to Damoun without the presence of adult representatives. The transfer is being seen as putting already vulnerable minors at risk of greater abuse. As the story unfolds, we take a closer look at what this means in the larger context of protecting Palestinian children from unfair and violent detention. We're joined by Ms. Sahar, who is the General Director of Ramallah-based Admir Prisoner Support and Human Rights Association. She joins us from Ramallah. Also joining us today is Muslim Imran, an analyst joining us from Kuala Lumpur. Thank you both for joining us and welcome to the show. Sahar, let me begin with you. Now, what does this mean, the transferring of children from Offer Prison? What is the significance of this?
Of course, as you mentioned, this is a vulnerable group of children that they face violations on a systematic way on their daily life inside the prison. So moving them to Damoun prison actually would be subjecting them for more harassment and restrictions on their daily life, on the level of education, on the level of health issues, on the level of family visits, contacting their families, contacting their lawyers, and of course the conditions in general for the minors, the Palestinian children inside the Israeli prisons are difficult, and they face lots of harassment and ill treatment and torture under interrogation as well.
Right. Sarah, now you're stating that the life for children in Palestinian children already is very, very tragic, very, very problematic. We're going to get to that later on in the show, but what I do want to talk about is how does the situation become bad from worse when they are moved to Damoun?
Of course, in Offer, as you mentioned, that they were in a group where an adult prisoner was responsible for them to face the restrictions and to have the dialogue with the prison authority and in the name of the children. When they were moved at the beginning of the week without this adult representative, will subject them for more harassment. But now, today we were aware that the adult person was already allowed to transfer to Damoun in order to continue taking care about the Palestinian children. But already Damoun prison in general should be highlighted that this prison was supposed to be shut down a couple of years ago because it's not convenient and it's not healthy. It's an old building where the High Court ruled that it should be closed couple of years ago. Instead, they are keep doing this. In general, the facility itself is bad on the level of hygiene, health, and so on. So this is the more difficult situation that they would face.
Right. Muslim, jumping to you and about what is happening at this point in time, if we draw parallels to how children are treated across the world, we are seeing, of course, a very grave violation of child rights by the Israeli prison officers here. Why isn't there more of an outrage across the world?
Meshal, the Israeli authorities are violating international law on different levels. Number one, they can't abduct children, but they do so. Dozens of Palestinian children continue to be detained by Israeli authorities. They are subject to Israeli torture practices, malnutrition, and abuse of their basic human rights. And number two, Israel has no right to transfer any of the occupied territories' citizens to any other part of the occupying power territory. Damoun is under what is proclaimed as Israel, and this means Israel is violating the Fourth Geneva Convention. Well, Israel does not care much about international law, but the international community has to care about international law. When Israel transfers these prisoners, child prisoners, from Offer to Damoun, we know very well that Israeli authorities have something up their sleeves. The Palestinian prisoners in Offer at least have some sort of political organization within the prison in Offer. and are nearer to their families and parents. When they are moved to Daman, the families will be subject to more humiliation when they try to visit their children. And the children are basically abducted and detained in inhumane conditions. I believe the international community has to step in and do something about it.
Right. Muslim, stay with me on that point. We're going to move to talk about whether and how the international community can step in. But on the point, I want to introduce Akram ElTodory, who's the head of International Relations Department at Saweed Association for Relief and Development. He joins us from the Gaza Strip. Thank you so much, Mr. Sattari, for joining us. Now, when we're talking about this move, we're talking about this transfer. How does it fit into the grand scheme of things? What was the purpose of this move at this point in time?
Well, it seems like the Israeli prison authorities have been doing that for a very long time. They have not only been moving the children, sometime in the past they're moving the women from some certain places to other places, the women prisoners, and most recently they decided to fix and install distortion interruption machines to intercept any communication between the prisoners. I think all those practices feed into something major that has been done in the Palestinian to the Palestinian prisoners, which is trying to make the life of the Palestinian prisoners as harsh and difficult as possible, to push the Palestinian factions who are negotiating over a prospective prisoners deal in order to make them think twice before just continuing in their demands, and to try to make them decide to accept whatever is being offered by Israel. Sometimes you find it difficult to believe that is what actually taking place. But when you look at the way they are dealing with things, when you look at the way they are dealing with the prisoners, children, either children, elderly, or women, you come to a conclusion that they are trying to make the life of the Palestinian, even in their prisoners, even worse, for the sake of using that as a leverage in the negotiation over the Israeli captive soldiers in Gaza Strip.
Right. Sahar, coming to this now, I do want to talk about what is happening and why this is happening at this point in time. The Prisoner Society states that this has come as a part of a series of efforts to roll back achievements defending Palestinian prisoners' rights that has been taking place systematically since 2018. Now, Mr. Sattari stated out some of the other moves that have been happening. Have there been any advances, any achievements in the protection of children detained within Israel?
For example, on the level of the education, in the past, the children were able to continue their education to the high school and register to the high school exams officially implemented by the Palestinian Education Ministry. It's forbidden since a couple of years, and if they have to do it, they have to do it secretly. The prison authorities chasing any detainee or prisoner that want to apply for the high school exams. There is restrictions on the books, the material, the educational material they can get. There is deterioration on the health conditions. There are several children that they were arrested after being injured, and there's lack of health treatment offered for them. The torture that these children face on the interrogation centers, that includes psychological and physical torture, isolation for long period under interrogation without meeting even the lawyer that represents them. As I said, the restrictions on the family visits. Several children, they don't get any family visits because they are punished for ban on family visits by the prison authorities. So the conditions, currently there's around 180 children in the Israeli prisons, mainly in 3 prisons, Ofer, Megiddo, and Damoun. So the condition more or less similar in all these facilities. There's no rehabilitation at all that is offered for these children while in prison. So basically, they get out of prison without being educated, without being supported socially and psychologically.
Sahar, stay with me on that point. Quickly jump back to Mr. Sattari and talk to him about the offenses on which children are detained. Now, there needs to be a factor that distinguishes children from adults. But if they're being treated like adults, what are the charges on which they are being detained?
Well, the charges is that they are being part of the Palestinian resistance. Some of the charges is that they are throwing stones at the Israeli settlers occupying the West Bank and enjoying the access to the unlimited access to the resources of the Palestinian in that area. Some children are actually at the age of 9 or 10. So it's up to you to imagine what can a child of 8 or 9 or 10 years can probably do, what kind of a crime can probably commit. And they are being now treated as adults, and they are being kept in spaces that are designed to accommodate other adult inmates. And they are now treated, presented in front, appearing in front of military courts and treated as adults. And that is something very shaming. How can a child at the age of 9, 10 or 11 years old be treated as such? They are deprived just exactly like the adults living the very same prison life under the Israeli occupation. And they are deprived from the visits, deprived from the, as was said by Mrs. Sahar, they are also deprived from the healthcare and any follow-up inside the prisons. And for you to imagine, I was in the same prison at the age of, when I was a child at the age of 15 years old, and I was treated the very same way, and all they can recommend you in case you're getting sick, they would tell you must drink a lot of water, and that's all they can recommend. So the living conditions, the prison conditions in there are inhumane for children, let alone for adults, let alone children. And those poor children now have to endure all of that for silly grounds and for silly charges, just as simple as throwing stones or just being against the settlers who are occupying the land and causing the widespread destruction to the Palestinian infrastructure in the areas of the West Bank.
Right. Muslim, now as Akram ElTodory mentioned from his own experience, this has been ongoing for quite some time, maybe ever since the occupation took place, detaining of children, violation of child's rights. Now, when we talk about the international community and what options are there to put pressure on Israeli forces to curb their tactics against children, what are some of the options? We heard about a bill being introduced in the United States, HR 2407, which is the Promoting of Human Rights for Palestinian Children Living Under Israeli Military Occupation Act, which basically wanted to pressure the U.S. from preventing U.S. tax funds being used for this purpose. Are there any measures that can work in this case?
Yes, I think a lot can be done. Since 1967, Israel has detained more than 1 million Palestinians, and until today, thousands continue to be kept in Israeli detention centers. These people are being subject to all forms of humiliation, and the Palestinian population in general are subjugated to all kinds of Israeli practices, embargo on Gaza, apartheid in the West Bank, etc., etc. I think the international community can and should play a role. The movement to end Israeli apartheid and occupation started small, but it's growing and it's gaining momentum. You look at Europe and how some European parliaments are voting to recognize Palestine. They are voting to boycott Israeli settlements. I think the same should happen in the United States. Now, there are a lot of civil society movements that are pushing for BDS and pushing for other forms of restrictions on relations with Israel, because the American and the European taxpayer shouldn't spend his or her money on arming Israeli occupation or helping Israeli apartheid and helping Israeli violations of international law. This awareness has to be created, and I think media has to play a role in that. Many people still don't know that their governments are actually sponsoring occupation and sponsoring apartheid. Now, there are movements that are more mature in the United Kingdom and in Europe that call for an end of any military cooperation with Israel, an end to imports from Israeli settlements, and a call for an end to armament of the Israeli military, because Israel, at the end of the day, is a nation made up of an army. Right. I think that this has to happen. Everyone has to play a role, and we have to spread the word. Now, social media helps us a lot, of course, but mainstream media should play the major role in that.
Right. Sahar, when we're talking about all these moves that can be made by not only international players and governments, but by civil society, does this have real impact on the children living within the occupied territories?
Not a huge impact, because I think the failure of the countries, the decision-making level in the different countries, especially those that they are members in the United Nations and in the Fourth Geneva Convention, for example, it's needed that they much more pressure Israel to stop totally arresting children for throwing stones. Like, I think it's the only state that prosecute children in front of military courts and imprison children for years for such activities. So what it needs really to put pressure to stop these practices and to release all Palestinian prisoners. Administrative detention policy also is used against children, and I think this cannot be tolerated, that the child is arrested based on secret information. So I think the grassroots activism alone is not enough. There's a need for more political will on the UN.
Sahar, sorry to interrupt here. Running short on time, just want to put in one last question to you to emphasize on the urgency of the matter and why there needs to be a movement across international actors. Do you feel like witnessing what is happening, observing, collecting data, that things have worsened from year to year when we talk about children, their rights being violated?
Definitely. If you just take the figures, the statistics, this year in 2019 alone, around 800 children were arrested. In every year, almost there's between 800 and 1,000, 1,500 children that they would be arrested and facing this horrible experience. This is what makes it urgent that it should be stopped, because it's targeting a whole generation in the Palestinian community.
Right. On that point, thank you so much, Francis, for joining us and taking out the time to shed light on this important issue. Akram ElTodory, who's joined us from the Gaza Strip, and Muslim Imran for talking about this issue. Thank you for watching Indus Special. We will see you again next week with more stories. Till then, goodbye and take care.